Hi. All right. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Happy afternoon. It's Independent Bookstore Day here at Main Street Books. You might be able to hear a little bit of the din that is out here in the bookshop. But we are so happy to be here on Zoom celebrating Independent Bookstore Day again. It's a one-day national party that takes place in independent bookstores all over the country, but definitely here at Main Street Books here in Davidson, NC. For us, it's a celebration of the literary ecosystem that we create space for. We're celebrating readers, booksellers, libraries. We had a virtual story time with the library this morning. Publishers, one of our reps came and said hello today, and especially our local writers, two of which are here with us this afternoon. We've got David Oakley and Tomlinson. Our guest of honor this afternoon is Charlotte writer David Oakley, and he's going to share the stage with Tomlinson. Many locals know Tommy as the beloved Observer reporter and columnist. He wrote for the Charlotte Observer for 23 years, where he was a finalist for the 2005 Pulitzer Prize in commentary. Tommy's also written for publications including Esquire, ESPN the Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Forbes, Garden and Gun, and many others. His stories have been chosen twice for Best American Sports Writing Series, and he is the author of the memoir, The Elephant in the Room, about life as an overweight man in growing America. Tommy's also a talented radio voice. He delivers thoughtful commentary on WFAE's On My Mind segment every Monday and produces a podcast called SouthBound in partnership with WFAE as well. For SouthBound, Tommy gives long-form interviews with really, really interesting Southerners. He and his wife, Alex, live in Charlotte, and Tommy joins us today to put David Oakley on the hot seat, or in the hot seat. David is the author of Nobody Eats Parsley and Other Things I Learned from My Family. He's been telling brand stories at Boone Oakley for years. He's won many prestigious honors, including the Kaopectate Award in the 8th grade for having diarrhea of the mouth. His first book, Why Is Your Name Upside Down, is full of stories from his advertising life. Despite this, he was recently inducted into the North Carolina Advertising Hall of Fame. He lives in with his wife, Claire, and their dog, Walter, in Charlotte, where they raised Sydney and Lucas. He loves his family very much and hopes they still love him after reading this book. Word has it that David really wanted to meet Tommy to pick his brain about his burgeoning writing career. So he used an old advertising trick. He left a burning copy of his manuscript on Tommy's front porch, rang the bell, and ran. In spite of this inauspicious introduction, Tommy read David's work and agreed to meet him for coffee, and the rest of their writing friendship is history. Thank you both so much for being here to join us on Independent Bookstore Day. This really is a day that we save to highlight our local talent. And while it's the first time we're virtual, we're glad to be able to do it nonetheless. Thanks so much for both of you for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a great, I'm really excited to be here with you guys. Ada, thank you, Beth, and Tommy. It's always great to talk with you, man. Hey.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure, and thanks to everybody for coming out. You know, I was talking to Ada just a minute ago about, you know, it's sort of a blustery, ugly day here. It looks like November, so it's actually one of the few days I feel like Zoom is kind of a benefit in a way. Although if you're like me, you're kind of tired of this now and you want to kind of get close to actual human beings again. But for now, let's do this, and let's plan to do it live some other time down the road. I also want to say, for those of you who haven't read David's work, this book or otherwise, if it was a record, it would probably come with those parental advisory stickers, you know. So if you have like an 8-year-old who wanders around in the background, oh, it does. Oh, who knew? So if you have like an 8-year-old wandering around, you're worried about the language, we might get into some areas, including the reason the book has that title, which is it's the punchline of a joke that I am not about to tell on Zoom. So anyway, I want to talk to David about writing. I want him to ask me a few questions, and then we want y'all to have questions about the work that we do or writing in general, whatever it is you want to talk about. So let me just start it off by this. So David, the one impression that I have from reading your work is that you have like a wild ass family. You know, everybody has there are crazy stories about basically every member of your family. And I'm wondering whether as you were growing up or even now, that your family felt like you guys were out of the ordinary, or was that just kind of what you were used to?
That's a great question, Tommy. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I always just thought that was like the way it was normal. I mean, just the way we were. I mean, both of my parents were artists. They were potters. My sister became a glass blower, one of the best in the world. And art was always there, but my family always had a sense of humor, and we always did some funny, crazy things growing up. And I just always took note of it. And I was very curious about things as I grew up. And I guess I just started writing them down a little bit. But I'm going to kind of do the politician thing. I'm going to change the question a little bit.
All right.
I'm going to go back off what Ada said to begin with. Is about 8 or 9 years ago, I know Tommy, I don't even know if you totally remember this, maybe a little bit, but I did send Tommy Tomlinson because I loved his work. I followed you in The Observer, and I'm one of the people who never wrote in and made fun of you or sent bad emails or anything, but I just really enjoyed getting my paper, reading it, and I felt like I knew you. So I got the courage to, I was writing these stories, these little short things that happened in my life. And I just wanted to honestly record. I mean, I was recording them for my family to have, just to pass on to my kids. And so they would remember this stuff. And I somehow got the courage to send them to Tommy, and I said, hey, would you have lunch with me? And we went to a place on East Boulevard. I know it wasn't, it was on South Boulevard and West, kind of. It was called Nan and Byron's, and it's not there anymore. Oh, yeah. It's a bar, but Tommy was nice enough to meet me, and actually was nice enough to say, there's some good stuff in here, Dave. You really should keep doing it, keep pushing. And you became a mentor, even though I didn't see you that much, but I would always read your stuff. And your articles that you wrote for ESPN as you moved on from The Observer, your article about Dean Smith when he had dementia, made me cry, because I went to Carolina and I was there, when they won the first championship. And your story about Jared, I'm going to get his name wrong, Lawrenson, the quarterback.
Lorenzen, yeah.
Lorenzen, who you guys were both in love with the same girl, Little Debbie. That was the best line of an article or story I've ever read, that you were both in love with the same girl. Oh my God. So anyway, so this is me being a fanboy, just talking with you. Sorry.
No, that's, if you want to go on 10 or 15 minutes longer,
I can.
That's fine with me. Nobody else wants to hear that, but so talk to me a little bit about, you've done, as you said, one book of these kind of stories already that I guess was maybe a little more focused on work type things. So these are almost all sort of personal family stories. Did the second come out of the first? Like you finished the first one and said, oh man, I got a lot more of these.
Well, it's funny because I realized that I did some of the stories that are in Nobody Eats Parsley. I wrote around the same time, or I started writing around the same time that I did Why Is Your Name Upside Down, which is really a compilation of how we did things at Boone Oakley, our ad agency here in Charlotte, how we were able to win the Bojangles account and all the behind the scenes. And the whole idea of that was it's much better to do a live performance when you're pitching a piece of business versus, do a PowerPoint presentation. And, we found these kids, and I saw something on Facebook, and this was 2010, and Facebook was still in its infancy at that time. A couple of guys who had written a little ditty about Bojangles, and I found them. I went and found them, and it had to be so creepy. Hey, I really like your stuff. Could you come to Charlotte and spend the night? It was just a weird thing, but they agreed to come, and they actually performed it live at our presentation. And that's kind of how we won the Bojangles account, because we said, we've got to take advantage of your not take advantage, that's a bad way of saying it, but we've got to use your fans, people who are truly in love with your product. So that's how that came about. But the second book really is just a lot of stories that are very personal about being a dad, being a son, being a husband, and, you know, different things that I'm very obsessive about, and making fun of myself. I'm a pretty easy subject to make fun of myself. I'm a hot mess most of the time, honestly. So,
well, there's one story that I really appreciated that is toward the end of this book. It's called Autograph. And it's about, this was not really dad or husband stuff. This is like Wild Dave in his younger days kind of stuff. Could you sort of explain, maybe tell at least the premise of that story to us?
well, okay, good. That's a good question. I like that story. I was at our house here in Charlotte, and my niece and nephew, my sister Lisa's kids, who were I guess 16 and 14 at the time, visited, and I asked them if they'd ever, you know, if they ran into a celebrity or one of their favorite musicians at a restaurant, would they go up and ask for an autograph? And they're like, oh, no, no one does that anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? I might go up and get a selfie. So I was like, man, I can't believe that this whole new generation has not into autographs at all, because growing up in Creedmoor, North Carolina, and I really didn't grow up in Creedmoor. I grew up in a little area called Northside, which was about 6 miles, actually, oddly enough, 6 miles south of Creedmoor, but it was north of Durham. It's called Northside. At the time, it actually had a post office, but it was also, the post office was also a Gulf station. So I don't know how they worked that out, but that's the way it was. I lived on a dirt road, and my parents had bought this land in like 1968 and wanted to create a pottery business. So I'm a 10-year-old, like in the early 70s, and I'm bored out of my mind out there, in the middle of nowhere, and what I thought was the middle of nowhere. So this is really where my writing started, where I started realizing that I could write. And I just decided one afternoon that I wanted to write a letter. I was a big baseball fan, huge baseball fan. And sorry, Tommy, I did not like the Atlanta Braves. I know you're a big Braves fan.
I am.
Yeah, they were not very good then. And I was a front runner, and I was a big fan of the Cincinnati Reds. And, I guess because they were winners. But when Hank Aaron was chasing Babe Ruth, I just decided I'm going to write Hank a letter. So I wrote him this like long 2-page letter on lined notebook paper, basically saying, I'm a really big fan of yours. And I was a fan of his. And I also kind of lied in it. I said the Braves were my favorite team and all this stuff. And and that was pretty much lying. But then I said, oh, is there any way that maybe I could get your autograph? It would just make my year if I had your autograph. So I just mailed it off to Hank Aaron, care of Atlanta Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta. I don't even think I had a zip code at the time. I just sent it. And oddly enough, like 3 weeks later, I walk out to our mailbox and I open it up, and there's an envelope with an Atlanta Braves logo in the corner, and it's like, it says to David Oakley. I'm like, what is this? What is this? And I opened it. It was a photograph of Hank Aaron. So it was like, and it was color, man. It was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this happened. And it said, to David, best wishes, Hank Aaron. It was incredible. So instead of just appreciating and enjoying the fact that I had Hank's autograph, I immediately went back down to the house, went back into my room, got out more lined notebook paper. And I'm like, man, if this guy from the Braves will write me back, all the Cincinnati Reds will write me back. So I just started writing letters. And the next day, literally sent 10 letters out the next day to like Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Joe Morgan. I think I even may have sent one to, I think I sent one to Catfish Hunter with the Yankees that first day. It was just a lot. So that went on, and it just started one of my first real obsessions, and that was collecting autographs. And it was just writing letters. And I think, I don't know, that's how it started. And I didn't know if you wanted me to go on to where it kept
Well,
going.
the story ends up in a different place, which is kind of funny. And I'll leave that to you guys to read that. But I thought it was that idea of just writing to some celebrity or somebody that you liked or whatever. That's sort of, I don't think anybody even does that anymore. You're right. It's the idea of capturing a selfie or something, or now with like social media and stuff, those people are on the same place as you sometimes. And so you can have this sort of, I don't know if it's a real conversation, but something facsimile of a conversation with them. I think that remoteness of people who are sort of famous or well-known or whatever is really interesting. And I still, to this day, even though I'm fully online on social media and all that stuff, to get like a letter from somebody still matters. It's different than any other form because you have to take the time to do it. You have to get out some paper. It makes your thoughts slower somehow. You know, it very much is like reading a book versus reading something online. It just the idea that somebody took the time to put it on paper makes it special somehow, right?
Absolutely. Even the art of like sending a thank you note now.
Yeah.
When you get a thank you note that's handwritten in cursive, it's just like, wow, this is not a bill. It's not something from, Duke Energy. It's a really nice handwritten note, and it means so much. And no one really takes the time to do that anymore.
Yeah. By the way, you guys might have noticed that something just popped up in the chat from Main Street Books. Y'all are welcome if you want to write any questions that you have and put it in that little chat box, and then we'll answer those questions along the way or toward the end or something like that. We can also open the mics up later on for you guys to ask questions directly. But if you want to just type it in, you're welcome to do that, and somebody will see it, and we'll make sure we get it. So David, what else do you want to talk about? Yeah, I think when we were talking yesterday about things we have in common and things like that, we sort of have this fascination with Las Vegas that I was really, several of the stories in this book are sort of gambling related or Vegas related or something like that. And I'm wondering where that sort of fascination came from for you.
I'm not sure where it came from. It kind of, and I don't know if it is a fascination from my perspective. From Claire, my wife's perspective, she probably thinks it's a complete obsession that's like way out of control. But I love the city of Vegas. I've always loved when I was a kid, I loved Times Square. When we would ever go to New York, we went a few times when I was a kid, and I just loved the neon, the advertising, just the brightness of New York City. And when I first went to Las Vegas, actually the first time I went there was in 1997 with my father. And I didn't have any money at the time to gamble. And that was the last thing that I was going to do, actually sit down at a blackjack table or a craps table. I was way too intimidated with that. And I remember that my dad gave me $100 he goes, you don't have that much money. You're still getting your career up and going, here, let me give you $100 and you can gamble with it. And I didn't gamble with it. I brought it home, and so that's how it changed. But I think, and then it's odd that I bring this up. There's just something about the vibe out there. It's just fun. It's an escape from responsibility. I started going with a group of guys every March for March Madness. And we started going the first weekend of March Madness because it's just like a crazy orgy of beer, basketball, blackjack. It's all the bees. It's just so much fun. As I've gotten older, we don't go on the first weekend anymore because it's just too much of a, okay, this is my first time I've censored myself, too much of a show, it's too crazy the first weekend. So we go the second weekend for the Sweet 16, and we didn't go last year because of COVID. It was canceled right at the beginning of March. So we didn't go, and we didn't go this year either, but I just love it. And I know that you said that you really enjoy it as well. So
I do. I think I think for me, I feel like a pretty safe life. I don't, I save money and I drive a Honda, I don't have anything fancy really in my life. And that's like the one place I feel like that I can get into the action a little bit. It's like sanctioned action,
Yes.
and I think that makes it's okay when you're there. And plus it's one of those places, and there are a lot of places like this for me, where I love being there for like 3 days. And then like the fourth day, I'm ready to come home. And so that's, I enjoy that little intense shot of it and then coming back. So I wanted to ask you sort of a writing question, because I suspect some of the people in this room here have lots of family stories, or they have lots of stories that stuff they've done along the way. And they've often thought, maybe I should write a book about this and that sort of thing. What was it like for you converting the stories that you experienced and maybe you told around the supper table, the stuff that was in your head, getting it onto the page?
Oh, that's probably the hardest part of it. And I think that, just the discipline that it takes to, you're not going to get it all done at once. And, maybe there's a story, I always say, or I shouldn't say I always say, but I think you have to write a little bit every day. And I think it's true that if you write for 30 or 40 minutes at night, or whatever is the best for you when you first get up in the morning, you'll be surprised how it starts to add up. And if it's almost like I keep a journal and I try to write 20 or 30 minutes every day about things that are happening. And sometimes I'll go back and like read through the journals and go, oh my gosh, that was so funny. If I hadn't written it down, I never would have remembered it. And that's why I started writing shit down. I just, because I would forget it. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I forgot that happened, whatever. But when even things that you write down, you forget that you write them down. And I don't know whether that's me getting into my late 50s or what, but and then I look back on them a few months later and go, oh my gosh, maybe I could combine that with this other story. And it kind of starts to come together as, when you were talking about Autograph, it was about that conversation that I had with my niece and nephew. And I thought back about like Hank Aaron. And then it went to this whole other story that my cousin and I were talking about when we went to a Baltimore Orioles game when we were in college. And it all kind of worked together. And I hope that's a good answer.
No, well, I think there's two important things that you said there. One is that sort of cumulative effect of writing every day. If you just if you just get 500 words on the page or something every day, 365 days of the year, at the end of that, you've got quite a bit of work. You've got if you wrote 500 words a day, every day, at the end of that year, you probably have a novel, right?
Sure.
If you wanted to. And so that sort of little cumulative steps in doing really anything you want to tackle. I mean, part of what my book is about is the sort of cumulative steps of trying to get just a little bit healthier every day instead of trying to take it all at once, right? And the other part about that is to write stuff down and to keep a notebook or a journal or something. I'm sort of obsessive about this. I have a notebook everywhere. I have one in my back pocket as we're talking right now. One of the best gifts I've ever gotten was my sister-in-law one year for Christmas bought me this thing called Aqua Notes, and it's a notepad you can put in the shower. It's got like suction cups on it, and you just stick it in the shower, and it's got waterproof paper and a waterproof pencil, and you can and man, I get ideas all the time in the shower because you're not really consciously thinking about work there, and that's when stuff often comes to you. And so I keep that stuff by the shower. When I'm in the car, I always have the phone handy in case I want to do like a quick voice memo or something like that. Or if it's a longer thing, I'll even pull over, and when I did my book, which for those of you who haven't read it, as Ada mentioned before, is sort of a memoir about my life as a fat guy. Yeah, that's the hardback. Ada, I think, showed you the paperback, which is a different cover. I've been keeping a pretty much daily journal notebook for about 12 or 13 years now. And where sometimes it's just like, here are 3 things I did today. Sometimes it's like 20 pages on however I'm feeling or whatever my life is like. There's just all kinds of stuff in there. It's just sort of a catch-all. And when I was doing that memoir, those notebooks were incredibly valuable to me to go back, not only to see like when I did something, but to remember things I'd forgotten that I'd done or I'd forgotten that I felt, and to put a shape on them. And so I always tell everybody that I talk to, any of you out there who want to be writers, it starts with just keeping a notebook of your thoughts and ideas, and just carry that around with you. Find a place. I'm in our home office right here, and if I could turn this computer, you'd see right here I have this giant stack in my bookshelf of all these notebooks I've kept over the years. There are like 70 or 80 of them, and so that kind of thing is incredibly valuable, I think, for not just people who want to become writers either, but people who want to remember their previous selves, right? I'm like you, David. I don't remember, I have a hard time remembering what I did last week, much less 10 or 12 years ago. Yeah. Well, I've got a chronicle of that in some way there in those notebooks. It's really, really valuable.
So let me ask you this. So when you were writing your book, which was a memoir, but it really was taking place when you were thinking of like, I've got to lose weight in a certain period of time. So it was almost like it was a year that you were going to like, or a year and a half. I'm not sure the exact time period. And you were giving updates monthly. But what I see that you kept flashing back and talking about how it like built throughout your life, and you kept going back to different points in your life and your eating and different things. Did you find your journals were really helpful with that? Had you written about how you felt along the way and you went back to that, or is that just...
I did. I think there were 2 things that happened there. One, as I went back through those old journals, there were things that I'd forgotten about. When I started to write the book, I just got out a legal pad and just wrote down like everything I could remember in my life that had to do with my weight. I filled up like 2 legal pads with it, but I didn't remember everything. And so there was stuff in those, especially last 10 or 12 years, that emerged in those notebooks, not just what happened, but how I felt about certain moments. And those were really useful. And it was also important in terms of accuracy, in a sense, like the way I remembered something was not always how it really happened. And so my notes from like the day that it happened were much more accurate than my memories of it. Memories sort of get swimmy, over time. And so, those notebooks were incredibly helpful for me to make sure that the way I remembered something was how it actually happened. And so, that's incredibly useful. And Ada has asked in the chat, and I'll ask you this too, David.
Okay.
When you write notes in a notebook, what's the writing like? Like, how are you capturing that stuff when it's sort of on the go? Do you want to take the first crack at that?
No, I want you to.
Well, I mean, for me, a lot of times it's, if I guess I during the day, I'll take pretty quick notes on something. Like if I have an idea or a feeling or something that I just want to make sure I remember, I might jot it down. It might be just a few words, something that I think will trigger the bigger thing later. And then usually at night, before I go to bed, is when I sit down and write a longer entry. And it will incorporate that stuff plus whatever else happened, plus whatever I'm feeling at the moment. And again, if I'm not in the mood or if I'm really tired, it might be just like 1 page or a few sentences. And then sometimes if I'm feeling really creative or emotional or expansive about something, it could be a lot, and And so it varies so much as I go back through and read. There's some days I'm like, not much of anything, other days, a lot of stuff. How about you? What do your notebooks end up sort of looking like?
Well, I mean, it's funny. The people at Boone Oakley who work at Boone Oakley always see me carrying this little thing around, and I write a lot of things in it so I can remember to get stuff done during the day. So I have a little list of things that I have to do, but I also always jot down things that I think are fun or funny or things that happen during the day. I often, well, I'll just say I feel like I do my best writing, at least I guess that's a relative term, but when I first wake up in the morning before anyone's up, and especially when the kids were still at home and they would be sleeping in, Claire normally sleeps later than I do. And I just get up, and if I can write for 30 minutes or just think about the thoughts when you're really fresh in the morning. I am. I just, maybe it has to do with Budweiser at night. I don't know. It's something, sometimes like that. Yeah.
I do feel like I'm more creative in the mornings. And so, like you said, your brain's fresher. And so I try to do, excuse me, I try to do most of my sort of creative writing type stuff in the mornings as much as I can, depending on what else is going on in our lives, obviously. But, and in the afternoons, I kind of go till I run out of gas, and often that's pretty early in the afternoon. And that's when I'll like answer emails or make phone calls or do what I call sort of admin work, fill out invoices and things like that, or maybe do some reading for upcoming projects. And so but I say this because everybody likes to know other writers' routines, but what my routine is doesn't really matter. It's whatever works for you. If you write the best at 3 a.m, great, and so just have your, people should have their own routines on that sort of thing. So we're getting a couple other questions. I'll throw one out to you first, David. Beth wants to know what we love to read. What have we loved sort of in our past, and what are we into right now?
Okay. Let's see. I always go back to, I love David Sedaris, and I just think he's so funny. And I think he's another influence that like really made me really think more about writing, because I would read his stuff, and he was in New York when I was in New York. And then, he grew up in Raleigh, and, the funny stories, and we would talk about going to the Little Art Gallery with Ruth Green and Raleigh. And I'm like, oh my God, I went to that same place with my parents, and he's telling me stories that are like real and relatable. And it made me feel like the stories that I have in my life could be shared as well. So he's a big influence. I'm also a ridiculous sports fan, so I try to read a lot of sports books. And I want to bring up, I know another guy who used to be at the Observer, Joe Posnanski.
Yeah.
Yeah. He his book on the Big Red Machine. He's done like, I just like to read sports books as well, just because I like to see what the background was like about how things were back in the day and even moving forward. So that's a quick answer.
Yeah, just a real quick plug for Joe. Joe's a longtime friend of mine. He lives here in Charlotte, and he's got a book coming out this fall.
I didn't know he lived in Charlotte.
Yeah, he moved away and came back.
I thought he was in Kansas City or something. Okay.
Yeah, he was for a long time.
Okay.
He's got a book coming out this fall called The Baseball 100. It's basically it's 100 essays on who he thinks are the greatest baseball players of all time. And I've read versions of it. It's great. If you're a baseball fan, or if you just care about sort of America and how we got here, there's a lot of sort of cultural stuff in there too. It's really good.
Sounds great.
Like you, David, I was, and still really into sports. And I think the first things that really captured me as somebody who maybe wanted to be a writer were the great stories in Sports Illustrated. From what I was subscribed to since I was like 8 or 9 years old, and those sort of what they call the back of the book pieces, the long stories in the back by writers like Frank DeFord and Gary Smith and Dan Jenkins, people like that. Those stories really captivated me when I was young. The other thing that has always captivated me are mysteries. When I was a kid, at the little library on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, where I grew up, I read every Nancy Drew book in the library. And then I read every Hardy Boys book in the library. And then like every Bobbsey twin, all those little kids mysteries. And to this day, I read the Lee Child books, Jack Reacher, who's this sort of 6'5" ex-army guy who kind of goes around the country helping people out. There's a mystery series by a guy named John D. McDonald, the Travis McGee mysteries that were written in the 70s and 80s, and I guess back to the 60s, that are my favorites. I still read all the time. Guys like James Lee Burke, Sarah Paretsky, who's done a bunch of great books. Laura Lippman has done a bunch of great stories. Walter Mosley. I can name a bunch of mystery writers that I've read over the years that I really love. And so what I've always thought about those sort of genre books, which is what people call them sometimes, they sort of look down on them as opposed to literature. I've always wanted to write for the people who love that stuff. I want to write stories with suspense and action and emotion, big, powerful things. Those books have always drawn me in more than what I think of as like literary novels. So the best literary novels also do that for me. So anyway, those are kind of the things that I think about. Let me see what the next question is here.
Wait, while you're looking at a question, I have to say something because you reminded me that you're from St. Simon's Island. Well, I've never been there, but I will tell you that, you know, there are a lot of stories, and this could be, if I ever do another book, which it just reminds me of a story of growing up. And when I would drive with my parents, we would go to Florida because my grandparents lived in Sanford, Florida. So we would drive from Creedmoor to Florida before I-95 was built. So we would drive down, and we would drive down like 601 and 301. And 301 went through a town called Jessup, Georgia.
Yes.
And yeah, Jessup in my family, we always know Jessup. And it's so funny that I remember stopping at a Texaco station or something in Jessup, and I'm standing outside, and my aunt was like, yeah, David, you know, someday, you know, I guess she thought I was smart in my class, second or third grade. I was kind of good. Anyway, whatever. She said, you know, David, someday you're going to be president. And I'll never forget her saying this. And she goes, when you're president, what's the first thing you're going to do when you become president? And we're standing out at this gas station in Jessup. And I said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do something about the smell in this town. And I hope you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's the pulp mills. Yeah.
It's the pulp mill there. I was just like, and when you said that you grew up in Brunswick, Jessup, I'm like, what is it? And then Ludowici is kind of close.
Ludowici, yeah.
Ludowici, is that how it's, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I'm from, South Georgia. And in fact, my mom and dad are both from around Jessup. And they met at a seafood packing plant down the coast and married and had me. And I grew up on the island down there. But yeah, it's a beautiful part of the country, but it's pulp mill country. And so if the wind's not right, it smells like rotten eggs, which the people down there will tell you is the smell of money. You know, so they're not wrong. So Nancy Schlegel has a question. Thank you for this, Nancy. And I'll pitch this to you first, David, and then I'll talk about it. When you're writing with publication in mind, do you have someone or a group that you share your writing with for comments or feedback?
That's a great question. And that is true. And this is going to sound really odd, but yeah, the first people that I really shared my stories with are my family. And I would share it with Claire and also my kids, Sydney and Lucas. And I'm saying, you know, they're kids. I mean, they're 25 and 27 now. But I always kind of would have them filter them, or if I could make my son laugh, I feel like, you know, it's good, or it would work. And I really, when I think about who the audience is, I really just wanted to write these things for my family. As it went out a little bit farther, I have a couple of friends that I would send stuff to, and they would be honest with me about it. And as putting the book together, working with two really good editors here in Charlotte, who I would always send stuff to, and they would get back to me and go, David, this is terrible. You cannot produce. No. Or they would be very, I'll tell you, their names. It's Betsy Thorpe and Maya Myers, both fantastic, and both here in Charlotte. Great editors. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's important when you're looking for feedback, not to have people who are going to tell you everything's great.
That's so true.
You know, it's I have friends of mine who I really like and hang out with, but I'm not going to show them any of my work early because they're just going to say, oh, this is the best thing you've done yet. It's wonderful or whatever. And while it's good to hear, it feels good, it doesn't help me make it better. And what I'm looking for in those early stages is somebody to help me make it better. Now, you also don't want somebody who like hates you and is going to trash everything either. You're looking for somebody who's sort of, I would describe as sort of a fan of yours, but somebody who's going to be honest with you about it.
Yeah.
And so for this book along the way, first of all, because it's a memoir and there's some intimate stories about my wife and family and friends in there, I showed that stuff to them first to make sure that they thought it was accurate and fair representation of the things that I had encountered. And so that was sort of a separate issue. But in terms of the writing of it, I sent it to about half a dozen friends, including Joe, who we've mentioned here, the Baseball 100 guy, to give me honest feedback about it. And, you know, I have a great friend named Rosita who lives in Ireland, and she's a beautiful writer and a fan, but she will also tell you if she doesn't like something. And so I would be paging through her notes on this, and it'd be like, page 7, oh, this is wonderful. Page 12, oh, fantastic. Page 27, this is rubbish. You know?
Yeah.
And so you need somebody to tell you it's rubbish if they think it's rubbish. Because, you know, when you're creating it, I think, or at least my goal when I'm creating it, is to be my most open self, is to put it all out on the page, try not to censor myself too much, try not to overthink what I'm doing, and get it out there the best I can. And then what I want people to do is to check me on that and to say, oh, it's too much. I need a little more here. This is rubbish, whatever it is, to help me put a shape on it. And so, you know, that having honest, good friends to help you in your work. And as David said, you can also hire people to do this professionally, but that is incredibly valuable to making the work better. One thing I always tell people who think about writing for a living is that if you have to decide whether you can handle your work being criticized, because if you put it out in the world, somebody is not going to like it. Even if you just send it to 5 family members, 1 or 2 of them probably aren't going to like it. And so you have to decide pretty quickly whether you think you can cope with that. And if you can, then put it on out there. If you can't, write it and put it in a drawer somewhere, and it's just an exercise for yourself. That thick skin, I think, especially when you're writing for publication and you're asking people to like pay for your work and all that sort of thing, that kind of stuff is crucial to have that layer.
It's so funny you say that because so my whole career has been in advertising, and I went through journalism school at Chapel Hill and ended up becoming a writer, a copywriter, not a real writer, a copywriter, you know, like, so I'm like writing TV commercials and radio commercials and things like that. And every day or like every week you have your work is killed for different reasons. It's killed because the creative director doesn't like it, or if it makes it through the creative director, it's presented to the client, you know, whoever that might be, and they may kill it or they may like it. So you do start to develop this thick skin and a resiliency that you're able to come back and do it again if it gets knocked down and you have to start over. And I used to call it, or a friend of mine, Luke Sullivan, who's one of the best advertising writers ever, he used to say, he used to call it outlasting the idiots. You have to outlast the idiots. You have to, if you have a good idea and they kill it, you've got to come back with a better idea. And finally, you're going to be saved by the deadline. because the deadline's going to come and they're going to have to produce something. And you just keep coming back with good stuff. Well, as I've developed, as I grew as a writer to be a creative director and in advertising, you do develop a really thick skin about it, and you're okay with stuff, with people criticizing you. Not totally okay. Let me just say that, not totally okay. But man, when you talk about actually writing about your own things that happen in your life, you're not writing about a Bojangles biscuit. You're not writing about come to Destin, Florida and vacation here. You're writing about, hey, there's a joke that my uncle used to tell me when I was a kid, and this stuff, and you're writing about very personal things, and you put them out there, and man, it's a different thing. It was different for me the first time that I got criticism. I was like, oh my gosh, they really don't like this. So I was really nervous about putting my first book out, and actually even more about this because I was even more open about how I was. I think I censored myself more in the first book. I don't know. I agree 100% with what you're saying. You've got to be ready for the criticism. You're going to get people who love your stuff, and even the people who love it. I'm like an insecure writer. I'm an insecure person overall. I think you like, do they really like it? Do they really like it, or do they just like me? Do they, are they just saying it? So I don't know. You just have to be, yeah.
I think that's something that we all have to figure out our boundaries on. For example, a couple of very wise friends of mine before my book came out told me not to read the Amazon reviews. Yeah. And they said, the reason is the good reviews will never make you feel as good as the bad reviews make you feel bad. And so I haven't. My book's been out 2 years. I ain't looked at a single Amazon review. I don't even know how many there are. When I call up my book on Amazon, it looks pretty good. But I don't care. What I care about is like the one-on-one conversations like I have at bookstores, like when I came to talk at Main Street Books a couple of years ago and had a signing and people came by and they didn't just say they liked the book. Most of them hadn't even read it yet, right? But they had stories they wanted to tell, or they had things they wanted to comment on that I had, met in some way earlier in their lives or whatever. That's the kind of stuff I care about. I don't care about what somebody in Montana who tossed a review off in 30 seconds thought about my book. I can't care about that because that will just keep me from being creative. And so you got to figure out how to navigate that no matter, who you're writing for or how you're writing.
Who told you that? Who gave you that piece of advice?
Well,
and you should write them a thank you note today.
Yeah, well, I've written many a thank you note to people many people have helped me along the way. My friend Joe, the guy with the Baseball 100 book, wrote a book about Joe Paterno, the Penn State football coach, and he was right in the middle of all this stuff. For those of you who don't follow sports, there's no need that you would know this, but Joe Paterno got caught up in a big scandal involving one of his assistant coaches, and all that stuff happened while my friend Joe was writing this biography of him.
Oh, wow.
And so it just his book became sort of a firestorm that people were really angry about on all sides about it. And at some point he just had to say, I can hear what some people are saying, but I just can't pay attention to the whole thing. Because if you do, you just completely lose any focus or any momentum of what you're doing. So what I want to do, we have some time left. If anybody who hasn't asked a question wants to either type something in the chat or just jump in, unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free to. David and I could chat a long time, but I'd rather hear from some of y'all. It's a quiet, introverted group. You all have a question you want to ask. I know it. But a good thing that somebody taught me one time, one of my bosses at the Observer, was if nobody speaks in a meeting, or if people don't speak in a meeting, come to those people afterward and ask them what they thought of it. Because the introverts don't want to speak out, but they will speak out one-on-one. So if any of you have one-on-one questions later, I'm pretty easy to find online. I suspect David is too. David, I want to ask you, you mentioned about your family and showing this stuff to them. There are a lot of stories in this book that are funny, but I think if you were in a certain mood and you were one of your family members, they don't always want to make them look great. What was the reaction like in the family, and how did everybody feel about these stories?
Probably the person that I was most worried about was writing about my mom. And, you know, she's 79 now and doing well, still living up in Creedmoor, and, you know, involved in the pottery business still. She's not making pottery anymore. But I was so worried about the story about her because I just, you know, my sister basically told me, and Lisa, I let Lisa read so many of my stories, and she's just like, you cannot write the story about mom. You cannot write that about mom. There's no. And I'm like, okay. And I decided to go up and talk to my mom about it. I said, look, I'm writing this book, and I'm writing about a lot of people in my family, things that went on, and I make fun of people in my family. I mean, I make fun of everyone. I make fun of Lisa. I make fun of, you know, my dad, and, you know, and in this one, I make fun of you, and I just want to talk with you about it. And she's like, kind of like, okay. I said, I'm going to read it to you. And I just sat with her and I read her the whole story, and it's a kind of a meandering thing. It goes into when she went underwear shopping with me in New York City once. And it was like one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. And I think she really liked that the story was about her. Actually, she liked that I'd written a story about her, you know, even though it wasn't the content that she probably would have picked. But at the end, she just kind of got to the end, and I said, and that's the story. And I said, so what do you think? And she just went, like, just kind of made the hand motion, like, that's okay. But, you know, and I knew that if she said it was okay for me to put it in the book. And as it's turned out, as the book came out, she really likes that chapter, because her friends asked her about it. And so it turned out okay. I had a couple of other family members who told me that I got some important facts of things wrong. Like I cooked the entire Thanksgiving meal that weekend. It was not my mother doing it. Like Melissa, my niece, let me know that she cooked everything and that her mom didn't cook anything. So I had it wrong in the book. But anyway.
All right. Well, you'll have to deal with that at the next Thanksgiving, obviously. I'll tell a quick story about this. So my mom read an early version of my book, and we had talked about the parts that she was going to be in. And at the end, I said, what do you think? She said, well, son, it was really good. I have two concerns. One is that there's a lot of cussing in this book. I said, yeah. She said, the other thing is, if I'd known you drank that much in college, I wouldn't have sent you any money. Which, looking back, was pretty fair, actually. So Beth has a question.
Can I ask a question before she asks that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick. Sorry, Beth. Sorry. Please tell me more about Drurys Beer. I've never heard of it. And your description of Drurys is the best description of any beer I've ever read.
So Drurys, I don't know if it's still around or not. It was when I was at college in the University of Georgia in the 80s. That was like the cheapest beer you could buy. And so we would buy, you know, me and my buddies would buy a case of good beer in this case being like Budweiser. And then like a couple of cases of Drurys, because we figured after the case of Budweiser, we didn't care what it would taste like.
Yeah.
And it was just awful. It's like, you know, like filtered through sweat socks. I forget how I describe it there.
No, I can tell you the exact line because I love this line. It's gym socks soaked in untreated sewage.
That's it. Yeah. That's pretty accurate. And so but it was, the upside was it was $5 a case.
Wow.
So, which comes out to about a quarter a bottle.
That's
so
nice.
Even in 1980s Georgia, that was a pretty good deal. So yeah, the honest truth that, you know, I actually don't drink beer much anymore, just rarely. But if I had to, if you could go back and like put statistics on your life and say, what beer have you drunk the most in your life? It'd probably be Drurys. So best question is, what ideas for projects do we both have? Do you have something teed up to go next?
I don't. I don't have one coming up right now.
It always is a weird question to ask somebody whose book just came out, because it's sort of like saying somebody who just had a baby, like, so when's the next one due?
Right.
And so it's totally fair to not have anything going right at the moment. I will tell folks what I've got going on. So I am currently working on a book, and it's a totally different thing. I'm doing a book on the Westminster Dog Show, which is just an idea that I'd had for years, something just a little world that fascinates me, and something that my editors at Simon & Schuster thought would be a good thing to write about. So I was going to start kind of full-time reporting on it last year, but as everybody knows, COVID wrecked everything, including the dog show business. So basically almost all the dog shows in the country got canceled last year. So Westminster is starting back up again. It's usually in February, but this year it's going to be June in New York. And so that will probably be the first post-COVID work trip that I make. As of this 2 days ago, I'm fully vaccinated in like 2 weeks past my second vaccine. So I'm ready to be kind of out in the world again. And so in June, I'm going up to New York to work on this. And so the book world is different. It'll probably be a couple of years before this comes out, but and I'm sure hoping that we can gather in person at that point to talk about it. But in a couple of years, I'll have a book about the dog show.
Will it be like Best in Show, the movie?
Well, I mean, I think parts of it will. I mean, that's part of the inspiration for sure, is that world is so fascinating. People, like anything, are so into it. In that dog show world, in the little world, they talk about it, what they call it is the fancy. So like, are you part of the fancy? Like if you're a dog trainer or something, you're in the fancy. And so I think that's where the word fancier comes from. Like if you're a, I don't know, porcelain pottery fancier, it sort of comes from that. But anyway, but also the other thing I want to do with it is I want to have part of the book be about how like normal people relate to their dogs. What that relationship has been. As far as we know in science, dogs and people have been partners in one way or another for like 30,000 years. How did that relationship start? How did it build? Why is it that dogs seem to know us better than any other creature on earth? Why is it that, we seem to love those animals and build that connection with them more than probably any other pet? And then sort of contrast it with this world where they're sort of put in this sort of artificial environment, and how do they react there? To be honest, the sort of driving question I had to start this book was, are those show dogs happy? Is that world that they're in, where they're sort of pranced around and literally exercised on treadmills, to get in shape, and fed this fancy food and carted around from city to city all the time. Are those dogs happy or not? I think in some level they are. They don't have the benefit that we have of knowing that there are other dogs out there living different lives. But that's sort of the driving force behind it. So even though I want this book to be fun, and I intend for it to be fun, there's sort of a serious question behind it, which is, what does it mean for a dog to be happy? And are the dogs who like slobber all over us and, run to the door when we come in at night and that sort of thing, are they happy? Or are they just doing that because they know we feed them? And science has learned a lot about this stuff. It's actually pretty fascinating, at least to me. Well, and I hope I can make it fascinating to you.
It makes me absolutely wonder whether our dog Walter, who is like just a black lab, who is like just amazing, it could be a show dog. And I wonder if he's sad that he's not a show dog, that he's, I could have been at the Westminster, and I'm stuck here on Crooked Oak Lane.
Yeah.
But he has a great life. But I wonder if he ever wonders about the Bright Lights, Big City, the show that he could have been in.
That's a question. That's a question I hope to get into somewhere. So we've come to 5 o'clock, which is about an hour. I'm willing to talk longer if anybody has any other questions. I'm sure David is too. Beth or Ada, I don't know if you guys wanted to step in at this point or how you want to do things, but
yeah, I'm towing this line between kind of a loud store and wanting to listen, and also knowing that we've definitely been graced with everybody's commitment to this hour. So anyway, I'll just say, cannot wait for the Westminster dog book, which I started getting excited about when you started reporting a little bit about it on Instagram.
Yeah.
But thank you so much to both of you for being here. All of the copies of David's book that we have in the store are signed at the moment. So if you're interested in getting a copy signed, yours will be signed if you order. I've also shared the link to Tommy's book, which we've got copies of in the store, just in case you're interested in that too. But
I'll be glad to sign any of those. We'll work something out.
Yeah, we've got Tommy.
If you get one and you want it signed, you're absolutely.
Well, write him a letter. Ask Tommy to come up and sign it. But David, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I often say, and it's so true tonight, that just hearing an author talk about their book is just, there's more, like, it's more than just the sum of this conversation and then the fact that these stories are on the page. Like, it just, I'm just so delighted to get to hear just little cracks into what goes on or what has gone on in your brain and in your family. And I'm really grateful that we're willing to join us and talk about it, because I know that's not always, part of the whole author. It has to be, but I'm glad you're willing to do it. But thanks to all of the readers who are here this afternoon too, celebrating Independent Bookstore Day with our local talent. Appreciate that tremendously, and hope to see both David and Tommy in person in the bookstore in the future, as both of you, hopefully you too, David, come out with more work. So thanks again. And check out we've got thanks coming in the chat too. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everybody. This was really cool. Spend your money at independent bookstores. That's where we get our books. Ada runs an incredible bookstore there in Davidson. Park Road Books in Charlotte is also great. Anywhere you are, there's an independent bookstore near you, and there are ways online to get books from independent stores too, so they can make it happen. So my career would not exist without them and without y'all. So thanks so much.
And thank you again, guys, Beth and Ada and Tommy. I just feel so lucky to have been a part of this today. And I agree. Happy Independent Bookstore Day to everyone. Let's go celebrate now and have a I can't even say it. Drurys Beer.
Don't do that.
Beer,
please don't do that.
I'm not sure you can find one. I just Googled the history of Drurys, and I don't know. I seem to be a thing of the past.
Oh,
the sewage treatment plant probably closed down. That's what it was.
Oh, all right. Thanks to everybody. We'll see you around.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
guys.
Bye.